The lower districts of RO9 always smelled of damp stone and rust. Water whispered through runoff channels beneath the catwalks, dripping from swollen pipes that lined the walls. The air was heavy, metallic, a taste that lingered at the back of the throat. Elvis Voss had long since trained himself not to notice. He walked with his survey slate clipped at his belt, logging nutrient balances from hydroponic outflows. The steady rhythm of it, the numbers, the charts, the calibrations, was what kept him anchored. It was quiet work, far from the screaming chaos of battlefields where he had once patched scouts together under fire. Plants didn't bleed. They told the truth in color and pH, and he had grown to prefer that honesty. His boots clanged against the catwalk. He was thinking about a faulty gauge back at his station when the sound reached him. At first it folded into the thrum of pumps and dripping water, almost mechanical. Then it came again, too jagged, too raw to be anything but a voice. A cry. It echoed through the shaft of an old maintenance well cut into the stone, bouncing until it frayed into silence. He froze, listening. Another plea rose from below high, cracked, desperate. Help. Please. Elvis unclipped his lamp and leaned over the grate. The beam cut through dust and moisture until it struck movement 20 feet down. A figure clung to the slick wall, her body pressed against rusted rungs as if the stone itself were trying to swallow her. Green skin glistened under the light. Braided black hair heavy with runoff. Torn silks, crimson once ceremonial, now clung to her ribs and thighs in tatters, soaked dark and humiliating. He recognized them robes of ritual procession. He had seen them near the Enclave Quarter. No one climbed into a shaft like this by accident. She had been thrown. Her head snapped up toward his light, eyes wide, glassy, locking on him with a kind of naked terror. "Don't leave me," she rasped, the words trembling. Elvis felt his chest tighten, but his hands were steady. He dropped his pack by the grate and pulled a coil of rope from its side pocket. Years of medic drills surfaced without thought. Anchor, test, descend. His body knew the motions even as his mind warned him of what it meant. Whoever put her here expected her to vanish. By pulling her out, he would inherit her fate. He didn't stop. He clipped the harness to his belt, but the scrape of metal made her flinch. She raised one hand, clutching a shard of broken tile with edges jagged enough to cut. Her voice came ragged. "Back away." The shard pressed against her own throat. Elvis froze, the rope slack in his hands. He kept his voice low, even, the way he had spoken to soldiers bleeding out in trenches. "I'm not here to hurt you." "You're from the Enclave?" Her eyes narrowed. "No, prove it." He drew the field knife from his belt and let it drop. The splash echoed off stone. He lifted both palms where she could see them. "Empty," he said. The trembling in her wrist eased, if only slightly. He lowered himself down the shaft, boots scraping damp stone. When he reached her, the bruises and cuts were worse up close. Her jaw bore a dark blotch, her lips were split. She looked exhausted, but her chin stayed lifted in defiance. Elvis spoke softly, steady. "I'm Elvis Voss, surveyor, medic before. I'm going to put this loop under your arms. You'll feel my hand at your side. Nothing more." She gave the faintest nod, eyes never leaving his. He slid the rope around her ribs, careful of the bruises, careful of the cuts. Her skin was cold as stone. She stiffened when his knuckles brushed her, but she did not resist. "Ready?" he asked. Her breath shuddered out, then she whispered, "Just lift me." They rose inch by inch. Water dripped down his neck. The rung groaned under his boots. Halfway up, her grip faltered, and the tile shard fell, shattering against the stone below. She gasped, clawing at his coat. Elvis locked the rope, braced, and pressed his voice into the darkness. Look at the light, not the wall. Her breath steadied against his chest, harsh but controlled. At the rim, he hooked an arm over the grate and hauled them both out. She collapsed onto the metal floor, coughing until her body shook. Elvis stripped off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The ruined silks beneath clung like mockery. He forced his gaze away, focusing on her pulse, on her shivering. "What's your name?" he asked. Her lips cracked as she answered, "Arian." She tried to stand, but her legs buckled. He caught her before she hit the floor, sliding an arm under her knees. She weighed less than he expected. Her fingers fisted in his shirt, her face pressed to his throat as though the light itself burned. Elvis adjusted his grip and carried her off the catwalk, stride even, jaw set. The corridors whispered with hissing pipes and the heartbeat of pumps in the walls. Above, the city glittered with fountains for people who never saw the lower lanes. Down here, only one man had stopped when she called. He carried her into his habitat, sealed the door, and laid her on the bench. Warm air met them, carrying the sharp scent of mint from the glowing trays. He had gone out tonight to measure nutrient flows. Instead, he had broken his routine with a choice that would change both their lives forever. Warm air filled the habitat, soft compared to the chill of the shaft. The hiss of the seals closing shut was the only sound before the silence pressed in. Elvis stripped off his gloves, set the rope aside, and moved with the same measured precision he always had tools back on their hooks, pack stowed neatly against the wall. But his eyes never left the woman on the bench. She sat rigid, his coat drawn tight around her shoulders, as if bracing for another blow. The tattered silks underneath were ruined, clinging gamply to her frame. She gripped the fabric with white knuckles, jaw tight, amber eyes darting to every corner of his unit, the bunk tucked against the wall, the single chair, the trays of green shoots glowing faintly in nutrient light. Elvis filled a basin with hot water, dropped a leaf inside to sharpen the scent, and laid out towels with the quiet efficiency of a medic. He had done this routine hundreds of times before, in tents filled with groaning soldiers, but here the air was different. This wasn't triage. This was a woman who had been cast aside, and she was watching him like he was just another executioner. He kept his voice steady, low. "You've got cuts that need cleaning. You can say no, but it would be better if I helped." Her gaze locked on his hands, tense. For a long moment, the only sound was the steady hum of pumps feeding water through the racks. Then she gave the faintest nod, her throat bobbing with the effort. Elvis knelt beside her, cloth in hand. He dipped it into the steaming water, wrung it out, and worked carefully, steady as stone. He rinsed grit from a gash on her arm, pressed a patch gently against the wound. She flinched at the touch, but didn't pull away. He didn't pretend not to see the bruises blooming across her jaw, the dirt embedded in her skin, the way the silks clung to her body. He just chose where to look. "You're not asking why I was down there," she said suddenly, her voice cracked but edged with defiance. He kept working, taping a strip in place. "If you want me to know, you'll tell." "Emmy?" he said. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes held his with something close to challenge. "They call me impure. I refused the bond. They threw me in." The word hung in the room like a knife. Elvis didn't flinch, though his stomach knotted. He folded the cloth and set it aside. He had seen men executed for less during the war, but the way she said it carried a weight beyond punishment. It was erasure. "What's your name?" he asked quietly, her lips parted. "Arian." The syllables carried both defiance and shame, like she expected him to spit it back. Instead, he pulled a thermal shirt from the locker, oversized, clean. He set it beside her without looking, then turned to check the gauges on the hydroponic trays. He busied himself, giving her the space to decide. "Okay," she said after a moment, voice low. When he turned, she was wearing it. The shirt swallowed her frame, sleeves hanging past her hands, hem brushing her thighs. His coat was folded neatly beside her, and the ruined sash lay like a severed memory. She sat straighter now, shoulders squared despite the tremor in her hands. Her chin lifted, meeting his eyes as if daring him to look away. "You don't owe me," he said finally. Her mouth curved into a hard line. Nobody does this without wanting something. He leaned back against the counter, arms folded, gray. Eyes steady. "I do." She stared for a long moment, searching his face for cracks. When she found none, her gaze dropped to the steaming mug he slid in front of her. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around it. She drank slow, letting the warmth fill her. Elvis turned back to the counter, his jaw set. He had gone out tonight to log nutrient flows, to file reports, to lose himself in charts. Instead, he had pulled a condemned woman from the depths of a shaft, and with that choice, the steady rhythm of his life was gone. Whether he had saved her life or altered his own forever, he didn't yet know. Rain tapped faintly against the narrow window, a rhythm that seemed to follow Arian's ragged breathing. She sat on the bunk, knees drawn up, drowning inside the oversized shirt he had given her. The fabric swallowed her frame, but her eyes, amber, sharp, suspicious, were still bare. Elvis set a folded blanket at the edge of the mattress and dragged the single chair to the heater. "You take the bed," he said simply. Her gaze darted to him. "And you?" "Chair's fine." Her mouth tightened, lips pale against the bruises on her jaw. She didn't argue, but her shoulders stiffened, as though the offer itself was a trap. Slowly, she pulled the blanket over herself, turning to face the wall. The hum of the pumps filled the silence. Elvis leaned back in the chair, coat across his chest, arms folded. He had learned to half-sleep years ago, a soldier's habit listening for changes in breathing, in the scrape of movement. Tonight, he listened for hers. Minutes dragged. Then her voice cracked the dark, softer than before. "If I fall asleep, will you still be here when I wake up?" "Yes." His answer came without hesitation, no explanation attached. One word, solid as the walls around them. She was quiet after that, but the tremor in her body slowly eased. Her breathing fell into rhythm, uneven at first, then steadier. Elvis closed his eyes, though not all the way. He kept watch, like he had with wounded scouts too afraid of closing their eyes. The pumps hummed, the heater ticked. Eventually, sleep claimed them both in fragments. By morning, the air inside the unit felt warmer, softer than the damp corridors outside. Elvis rose early, boiling water, setting root flour cakes on the pan. He moved with a calm efficiency, but his mind wasn't on the gauges. It kept circling, back to the way her voice had cracked in the dark, as if the question had cost her something to ask. The scent of broth reached her before she stirred. Arian sat up slowly, hair tangled, braids undone from her restless night. The blanket slipped from her shoulders, the shirt hanging loose. She noticed his glance, pulled the fabric tighter, but he didn't apologize. He only turned back to the stove. "You didn't sleep," she said, voice rough. "I slept enough." "I've gone longer." He set a bowl in front of her. "Eat." She hesitated, staring at the broth as though it might vanish if she touched it. Then hunger overpowered suspicion. She tore the cake into small pieces, dipping them into the bowl with quick, careful movements. For the first time, she ate without flinching at the sound of his steps. "You're wondering why I'm here," he said at last. She froze mid-bite, eyes sharp. "Yes." Elvis leaned against the counter, arms folded. "Most men don't live down here unless they're hiding. I'm not hiding. I survey plant systems. Check flows, balance nutrients, stop mold before it kills the racks. It's work most don't want, so they send men like me. Her brow furrowed, skeptical. So you're not cast out? No, I left service years ago. I wanted quiet. She studied him with a narrowed gaze, searching for lies. When she found none, her shoulders eased, but only slightly. She dropped her eyes back to the broth, voice lower now. I was supposed to bond to a council elder, twice my age. They said it was my duty, my gift to the enclave. I said no. A spoon clattered softly against the bowl. Refusing makes you impure. A stains are erased. Elvis's chest tightened, but he didn't let it show. He poured water into her mug, an ordinary act that meant something more. She wasn't erased here. You didn't deserve it, he said. Her amber eyes snapped to him, wary. You didn't even ask if I did. I don't care if you did. His voice was calm, even. You're alive. That's enough. She looked away quickly, spoon stirring broth she no longer seemed to see. Yet the tension in her shoulders had shifted, not gone, but softened by a fraction. For the first time, since he had hauled her out of the well, she looked less like someone waiting to vanish, and more like someone weighing the possibility of staying. The lift doors groaned open, spilling pale light into the narrow shaft. Arian flinched at the brightness, hand rising instinctively to shield her eyes. The upper plaza stretched before them, polished stone, white tiles scrubbed clean, fountains arcing in perfect symmetry. The air smelled filtered, chemical, nothing like the rust and algae of the lower lanes. People in pale fabrics moved with practiced grace, their footsteps too quiet on the smooth floor. Elvis stepped forward without pause. His stride was steady, his posture tall, as if the stairs sliding over them were no heavier than mist. Ariane's pulse hammered in her throat, every instinct screaming at her to shrink, to disappear. She followed only after a beat, her fingers twitching near his sleeve before curling into her palm. The first head turned almost immediately. A man's. Eyes flicked from her green skin to the plain tunic cinched at her waist, then away as if scorched. A woman whispered behind her hand, the sound carrying farther than intended. Arian felt the heat of their gaze crawl across her back, across her face. She fought the urge to drop her head. Elvis didn't slow. By ignoring them, by walking through, their whispers as if they were nothing, he pulled her into his calm. Every step beside him felt like walking across fire, but he absorbed the burn. His stillness, his refusal to bend, became a shield dot at the edge of the plaza. Water spilled down a row of glass fountains, sheets falling in flawless rhythm. Arian stopped, her reflection bent and broken across the cascade. It's too clean, she muttered, the bitterness slipping free before she could bite it back. Looks nice, Elvis said, but his eyes stayed on her, not the fountain. Doesn't mean it's better. She turned her gaze on him sharply, testing, but his expression didn't waver. The silence stretched until he guided her toward a shop tucked against the far wall. Its front was plain, unadorned, racks of coats and trousers lined neatly inside. The shopkeeper glanced up, eyes flicking from Elvis to Arian, then back to the counter. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Elvis walked in with the same steady stride, pulling a dark coat from the rack. He checked the seams with practiced hands, then held it out. Try it. Arian hesitated, her throat tight. Every nerve screamed. This was exposure, that slipping into something new was another trap. But Elvis didn't push, didn't explain. He just waited, eyes steady, hands offering without demand. Slowly, she slid her arms through the sleeves. The coat hugged her shoulders, fell firm against her waist. For the first time since the well, she didn't look like a discarded offering. She looked like she belonged to herself. They'll still know, she whispered, staring at her reflection in the small mirror near the rack. Let them. Elvis's voice was low, steady, carrying weight, got something in the way he said it struck her. She turned, standing close now, so close the air between them felt charged. Her eyes searched his, hungry for cracks, for the lie she was certain must be there. She found only the calm certainty that had carried her up from the well. Before she could think better of it, she reached up, fingers brushing the back of his neck. The kiss she pressed to his mouth was quick, raw, more defiance than hesitation. But it was real, warm, chosen. When she pulled back, her lips trembled, but her eyes didn't waver. "Take me home," she whispered. Elvis's jaw tightened, not with resistance, but with control. He nodded once, then guided her out of the shop. The stairs hadn't stopped, but Arian's head stayed high this time, her chin level, her stride firmer. No one moved to block their path. No one dared dot by the time the lift doors closed behind them. The plaza already felt distant, like a battlefield walked through and survived. Arian leaned against the wall, the new coat wrapped tight around her, her breath quick, but no longer from fear. For the first time since the well, she felt something else rising in her chest. Not safety, not yet, but possibility. The habitat door sealed behind them with a muted click, shutting out the sound of dripping lanes. Elvis hung his survey coat on its hook, the motion steady, precise. Arian stood in the center of the room, the new dark coat still wrapped tightly around her. Her braids, hastily tied back for the plaza, had loosened, strands falling forward to shadow her face. She didn't sit. She didn't run. She just stood there, her breath ragged as though she had walked through fire and was only now realizing she hadn't burned. "You walked through the plaza," Elvis said, setting his pack on the counter. His voice was even, but there was weight beneath it. "You didn't fold. That was yours." Arian's head lifted, amber eyes locking on his. "It didn't feel like it until you were beside me." He shook his head slightly. "I didn't make you do it. You chose." Her lips parted, a tremor of uncertainty breaking through her usual defiance. "And what if I choose wrong?" Elvis leaned against the counter, gray eyes steady on hers. "Then we deal with it together." The silence between them thickened, but it wasn't hostile. It carried charge, the kind that made the air feel tighter around the lungs. Arian took a step closer, then another, slow and deliberate, as if testing her own courage. Her hand brushed his sleeve, then slid down to his forearm. Her fingers lingered there, pressing lightly into the solid muscle. He didn't move, didn't seize control, but his stillness was its own answer. She set the pace, her voice dropped to a whisper. "I thought I was ruined, thrown away, filth." Elvis's jaw tightened, but his reply was calm. "I never saw filth. I saw someone fighting to stay alive." Her throat closed at that, a sound caught between sob and laugh. She leaned into him, forehead pressing against his chest, fingers clutching the fabric of his shirt like it was an anchor. He lifted his hands slowly, deliberately, resting them on her back. She stiffened at first, then melted into the hold, breath trembling against him. When she tilted her face up, her eyes carried fear, but also need. Elvis lowered his head, brushing his lips against hers, soft and careful, giving her space to retreat. She didn't. Her hands slid to the back of his neck, pulling him deeper. Into the kiss. What began tentative grew steadier, warmer, until neither pretended it was an accident. They moved together toward the bunk, steps unhurried but inevitable. Elvis lifted her with a medic's care, setting her down with precision, not haste. The coat slipped to the floor, her plain tunic shifting as she drew him closer. His restraint, honed through years of discipline, balanced against the fragile. Hunger in her. Their breath mingled, rough and real, hands gripping, but never taking. When the tension finally broke, it wasn't violent or desperate. It was quiet, heat against skin, touch given and returned. Her body eased beneath his, not out of fear, but trust. For the first time since the well, she wasn't clinging to survive. She was choosing to stay. Afterward, they didn't separate. Arian lay with her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. Elvis threaded his fingers slowly through her braids, anchoring her to the silence. She whispered into the dark, "Why me?" His reply came without hesitation. "Because you were there. Because I couldn't walk away. Because now I don't want to." Her lips curved faintly against his skin, the beginning of a smile that carried exhaustion and something far deeper. She pulled the blanket over them both, her body pressing closer, as though claiming the space she had been denied. Her whole life. When morning came, she dressed in the new coat, tying the belt firm around her waist. She stood beside Elvis as he checked the hydroponic trays, her movements no longer hesitant. She didn't walk behind him. She didn't hide. She matched his stride dot at the door. She glanced back at the folded remnants of her ceremonial silks. "Keep them," she said quietly. "I want to remember that I lived." Elvis nodded, storing them in the container with the same care as before. When they stepped into the corridor, the damp stone and rust smelled the same as always, but the way Arian walked, chin high and stride firm, made it clear everything had shifted. The lanes outside smelled of damp stone and rust, the same as they always had, but Arian walked through them differently now. Her coat was cinched firm at the waist, her chin lifted, her stride deliberate. Elvis walked beside her with the same steady calm, slate clipped at his belt, his survey pack over one shoulder. A maintenance worker passed them on the catwalk, eyes flicking briefly to Arian before sliding away. Another figure in a patched cloak leaned in a doorway, watching for a moment before spitting into the runoff channel and turning aside. No one stopped them. No one spoke. But the weight of notice pressed heavier than whispers back at the unit. Elvis logged readings while Arian stood at the small window, watching rain smear the glass. Her reflection looked like a stranger she was still deciding whether to recognize. "They'll come looking," she said without turning. Her voice was steady, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her. "They won't let me just walk away." Elvis didn't look up from the slate. "Maybe, but they'll have to come down here. And if they do, they'll find me first." She turned sharply, eyes narrowing. "You can't fight an enclave. You can't fight their law." "I don't plan to," he said. He set the slate down and met her gaze. "But I don't plan to hand you back either." The silence between them crackled. She wanted to argue, wanted to lash out, but his certainty stole the words from her. He wasn't boasting. He was stating a fact, the same way he might note the pH balance of a tray. That, more than bravado, unsettled her. By evening cycle, the first sign came. Elvis returned from the survey office with his jaw tight, a folded sheet in his hand. He laid it on the counter where Arian could see. The emblem stamped at the top was unmistakable, the enclave's mark. Black ink on gray paper. Notice of retrieval. Arian's breath left her in a shudder. Her hands curled into fists. The words blurred, but she didn't need to read them. She knew what they said. Impure. Condemned. Returned by force if necessary. "They've put it through the office," Elvis said, his voice level. "That means they know someone pulled you out. Then it's over." She backed away, her eyes wild, the panic rising like it had in the well. "They'll drag me back. No." His voice cut clean across hers, quiet but unyielding. She froze. Elvis stepped closer, not crowding her, but close enough that she had to meet his eyes. "You're not theirs to erase anymore. You choose what happens next." Her chest heaved, anger and fear fighting in equal measure. "And if my choice puts you in danger? If they take everything from you for harboring me?" Elvis's jaw set, the lines in his face sharpening. I left one war because I was tired of watching people break. I'm not going to stand aside and let them break you. If they want to make me their enemy, that's their choice. She stared at him, trembling, but the panic in her eyes gave way to something else, something steadier, fiercer. For the first time, she didn't look like prey, cornered in the dark. She looked like someone about to decide to fight. Later, as the unit dimmed for night cycle, Arian sat on the bunk with the coat folded across her lap. The paper notice lay on the table, its black ink like a stain that refused to fade. She traced the edge of the coat seam with her fingers. Her jaw set. "If they come," she said, voice low but hard, "I won't hide. I won't kneel." Elvis sat in the chair near the heater, arms folded. He gave a single nod. "Then we stand together." The pumps hummed, rain whispered against the window, and the air between them carried a different weight than it had before. Not just survival, not just trust, a shared defiance, waiting for the moment it would be tested. Rain still clung to the lanes when the enforcers came. Elvis heard them before he saw them, their boots striking metal catwalks in unison, the hiss of breather masks, the faint rattle of weapons carried too openly. He rose from his chair by the heater and crossed the unit with deliberate calm. Arian was already standing, coat fastened, braids tied back tight. Her hands trembled once at the sound, then steadied. She looked at him, not for permission, but for confirmation. "They're here," she said. "They are," he replied. He clipped his slate to his belt, not as a weapon, but as part of his uniform, as if this were any other survey run. His gray eyes stayed level. "We walk out together." When the door opened, damp air swept in with the enforcers. "They're black." Insignias gleamed faintly under the strip lights, the enclave's mark stark against the grime of the lower lanes. The lead officer's visor hid his expression, but his voice carried the sharp authority of someone who had never been told no. "You hold property of the enclave. Release her." Arian stiffened, her lips curling as though the word itself burned. Elvis felt the weight of her fury beside him, but he didn't let it pull him into recklessness. He stepped forward, his voice even. "She isn't property." The officer tilted his head. "Impure refuses the bond. She is condemned. Stand aside, surveyor, and we will not mark you." Behind him, Arian's voice cut through, clear and defiant. "I am not impure. I am not condemned. I am—" She stopped herself, breath shuddering. Her jaw tightened. For a heartbeat, Elvis saw fear in her eyes. Then it broke. She stepped to his side, no longer behind, no longer hidden. Her chin lifted. "I was chosen as speaker." The words struck like a blade across stone. Even the officer flinched. Elvis's gaze shifted to Arian, searching, but she held herself steady, her eyes blazing. "They didn't throw me into that well because I refused a man," she said, voice carrying across the lane. "They threw me because I refused their control. A speaker is meant to be the voice of the enclave. They wanted me bound, silenced, owned." Her throat tightened, but she forced the words. "I said no, and they tried to erase me." Murmurs rose from doorways, from shadowed figures who had drifted closer. Neighbors, workers, the unseen life of the lower lanes. Their eyes gleamed in the dim light, watching, listening. The officer's voice grew harsher. "Lies. She is nothing. Return her." "No." Elvis's reply was quiet, but it cut through the lane. His stance was solid, shoulders squared, his presence a wall. "She isn't going anywhere with you." The enforcers shifted, weapons rattling against armor. But they hesitated, not because of Elvis alone, because of the watching eyes in the doorways, the whispers spreading like fire. A speaker cast into a well, a woman erased for saying no. The story was already slipping from their control. The officer gave a sharp gesture. The enforcers pulled back, retreating into the mist of the lane. The notice on Elvis's table meant nothing now. Their authority cracked not by violence, but by visibility. When silence returned, Arian's breath shuddered, the defiance draining into trembling relief. Elvis turned to her, steady as stone. You chose to stand. They couldn't erase that. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but she smiled faintly, tired and fierce. She slipped her hand into his, fingers twining with deliberate certainty. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was clinging to survive. She felt like she was stepping into her life. Later, in the unit's quiet warmth, she stood by the container that held her ruined silks. She lifted the fabric, stained and hined, torn, and folded it carefully back inside. Keep them, she whispered, not as shame, as proof. Elvis nodded, closing the lid with care. The hum of the pumps filled the silence, steady and alive. Arian stood taller than she had when he found her hand still in his. The well was behind her. The enclave had tried to erase her voice, and instead they had given it power. For Elvis, carrying someone had always meant loss. Tonight, it meant something else, a future he hadn't dared imagine. When Arian looked at him, her eyes fierce and unbroken, he realized the truth of it. She hadn't only saved herself. She had changed everything.